Sure. Do you like my high-tech mic?
I didn't even see that. I like the mic though. I had hired movers, and they did it so quickly. They were awesome, all that stuff. And then while I was like doing like the billing stuff on his little iPad thing, he was like, "So what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a grad student." He's like, "Oh, because we saw your mic and audio setup and all that stuff. We thought maybe you were a singer." And I was like, "What do y'all do? Do y'all just like take guesses of like what people do?" And yeah, that's what they do. They as they're moving people's stuff, they look and wonder what people are doing.
I get that all the time, but I have a whole dedicated office. And I just
Oh,
like,
I believe
we
it.
do full time. And they're like, "Oh, can I look it up?" And it'd be like some old white man. I'd be like, "No, don't worry about it. Totally, don't
No,
worry
there's a
about it. I
password.
paid." But I too have to move. This is going to be a very interesting month. I don't know how we're going to do it. And I might have girl boss a little too close to the sun by going to grad school.
Well, bless you on all those endeavors because, yeah, I just moved and I've decided, even though I don't love my apartment right now, it's caused me a massive headache. I'm going to stay here. Yeah. I'm not moving again for another 3 years. I've decided.
The last move I did, I paid someone to pack and I paid someone to move. But it ended up being really expensive because I thought because I had paid someone to pack and then we got movers that I could leave. And you have to actually watch them move you. And that it just cost me a couple $100 and I wasn't. And so I'm still kind of scarred from that. So now I'm like, I'm going to have to hire I'm going to do the same thing again because I can't go to school, do the book club, do YouTube, and pack my house and find a place to live. And the market right now is trash. Okay. But that's not what y'all are here for. We are reading Playing in the Dark. We've been reading this book for a very long time. Yes. So I hope
it's ironic because it's a pretty short read.
It is, but Toni Morrison's not easy. Like I'm probably going to do a video on that. Because, I think, and this is part of what led me to do the book club. Yes, we have candles, by the way. Hold on, let me set the tone.
Yes.
It's been carrying me through. This is clarifying. It might not let me do it. Hold on. Anyhow, the thought was while I deal with these ableist ass writers, like they use two hands. It's kind of like,
I know.
What if somebody only has one hand?
And I invested in some of the old school lighters, the refillable lighters. Ain't no better.
I said that in earnest. Okay, clarifying is not happening today, so we're gonna go with focus. This is the one I've been burning the most. We have 5 candles in the book club that are all for helping you focus.
That's awesome.
Well, helping you read. So yeah, we have clarifying, a loving ethic, focus, rest, togetherness are the themes. But I really do like these because they help
all the things we need in quarantine and don't have.
Yeah. Okay. So the point I was trying to make though about the Toni Morrison comment was that like on social media, people will be like, "Oh, I want to read a book," and everyone loves to quote Toni, and it kind of pressed people to go pick up Toni Morrison. And obviously, we saw the Toni shirt. We read Toni every February. We're gonna be rereading The Bluest Eye next year. But Toni's just not easy.
No, there's no follow through on that Twitter thread. It's like, okay, so y'all check in about The Bluest Eye? Y'all checking in about Sua?
Yeah, like somebody tweeted the other day that like Toni Morrison writes Black horror, and she does, but like that was period.
Right. But she does. She writes. So when I was rereading this at the time we were doing the syllabus, I was doing a paper on Toni Morrison as kind of like as a critical figure in writing Gothic horror, looking at like Beloved and some of the other stuff, because she has creates a lot of like Gothic horror tropes that enmesh kind of like Black history, Black culture, right? But it's hard to kind of unpack. It's very ironic that she becomes one of the like premier people that gets cited as not necessarily easy reading, but as like, this is who you should read first. I remember my mom gave me The Bluest Eye to read when I was like 12 or 13. I remember being like, huh? I read like the first couple pages and put the hell down. I was like, I can't do this.
Besides being a child. I say this all the time, but if it was not for Oprah Winfrey, I don't know that like I would have ever like I took AP English in high school. So we got a reading list and I did Gloria Naylor and no, I did yeah, I did Gloria Naylor because I did Bailey's Cafe and Women of Brewster Place. And then I did Toni Morrison. But part of like I had a white teacher and again, Oprah's book club. That's why Toni Morrison was like on the list was because of Oprah. And then at home, my mother and my grandmother would read Toni Morrison. Now the crazy thing is that makes it sound like I lived in a very intellectual household. I remember talking to my grandmom about Toni Morrison and she'd be like, "Girl, I don't know what this woman talking about, but I'm gonna read the book." So like she read Paradise and my grandmother was like, "I didn't like that." I distinctly remember my grandmother not liking Paradise.
Oh
And it
my
wasn't
god.
until I got into a classroom and we could go through the motifs of Song of Solomon. And honestly, maybe in 2023, that'll be the book we read because I need to reread Song of Solomon because I read it in high school. But like
Yeah.
a lot of that was Oprah's book club.
I know a lot of people. It sounds weird to say, but I know a lot of people who don't like Toni Morrison. Like, one, I feel like that is such like a family thing you just cited because my mom. It was funny that she gave me the bluest eye in the first place because for the longest time she used to say, "I can't read Toni Morrison." I was like, "So why'd you give it to me?" She was like, "I don't like it." But then like last year she was like, "Oh, I meant Alice Walker." So I was like, "I'm confused which one you don't like, which one you can't read." But either
No,
way,
you have
those
to
kind
be
of get
patient.
thrown into it. Yeah.
I think that even when you consider like that era of writing, like a Toni K. Bombara, a Toni Morrison, a Alice Walker, and Tazaki, like that kind of class or canon of Black women writers, is it fair to say very allegorical? I don't know. Toni just has a very like wispy way of. She's also a very like I said what I said, no context.
Yeah. And that kind of assertiveness right out the gate when she's writing, I think that's also why this text was so illuminating, um, because it kind of lets you know where she's coming from when she writes. I think I mentioned in the syllabus that there's a long actually an essay that's probably a similar length to this book, because again this book comes from a lecture series. It's Unspeakable Things Unspoken. And for context, I've been recommended to read this book twice, both by, mentors who were in the English departments, once at, my undergrad, now in my grad program, who wanted me to revisit this, to understand where I wanted to approach literature from. And so with Unspeakable Things Unspoken, she really takes us through, several of her lines in her text, like the starting lines, and tells us like how she gets there, why she gets there. Because essentially her kind of trademark is that she tells you almost everything there is to know about the book in the first two lines or so. And so she walks us through that process of how she does that. Why, like she'll be like, "Oh, I commented on she'll say something very steeped into like the landscape of it. So for instance, one of them is like, there was the blackberries, and she'll be like, well, blackberries against nightshade. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of thought. It's not just kind of like things thrown together because they sound pretty, which is often, I think, maybe like the automatic thing to assume, right? Is that, well, it sounds pretty, which it does. If you get the audiobook, it sounds
I
wonderful.
mean, Toni always sounds wonderful reading. I can't listen to her. She sounds wonderful reading her own books. Do I understand anything that she says when I listen? I go to sleep. I have,
Really?
in terms of self regard, I have that as an audiobook. I have Beloved as an audiobook. I was like, girl, oh, I mean, I can't, because it's so like, I feel like my grandmother, like, not my grandmother, because my grandmother was from like Brooklyn and like the party, but like the grandmother is like
Mm-hmm.
reading to me. And it is so like, I don't know, could I listen to Maya Angelou talk? No, I'd fall asleep.
Oh yeah,
It's same difference.
I could see that. But she's so theater that I get swept up in the, like, when I read it or heard that she like had done acting. kind of first and foremost. I was like, this makes so much sense. One, because her the way she writes has so much presence that you feel that she sets so much of the stage. Like it's basically like these books are like plays, but without kind of like the traditional markings of a play, right? Like it doesn't say scene, break in, like all of those things, but it has all of those elements, right? So she sets up the entire setting. She's very theater.
I would say of this book, which maybe I should have probably got on audio, because as like now I hear you, like you're talking about the way she sets it up, she does. And this is actually one of the easier to understand Toni Morrison books that we have read.
Yeah. And I wonder if some of the difficulty also comes from the way that she's referencing white, what I'll just say is white literature or, American literature, right? The way that she's like taking us through these stories. And it's really interesting how she's referencing them because she's describing them in a way that kind of suggests to me like, don't even bother, you don't have to read this, I'm gonna tell you what you need to know here. But it gets a little convoluted in places, like especially with when she's going through Hemingway, when she's going through Sapphira, I forget the book.
She digs into Hemingway very deeply.
She digs into those texts where it's like, I'm not going to recommend to people who want to read this text that they need to read those books for themselves, because honestly, those are very dry. I can't read those. I can't read white literature unless I'm actually forced to.
You're in a PhD program. I'm sure you've been forced to.
We were just talking about, what is it to read or to not read? And I'm going to tell you, there was a lot of times where it was to not read. So
I bought all the books for this class, and I'm like, why?
No, I
bought all my books for this one class, and then the class started. I can't read online, so like it's either I read the physical book or it's not. But I think at this point, there's just certain books I'm not going to read.
No. You know what? Going through the syllabus is helpful to look at the syllabus early on and be like, I know I'm not going to read that. How am I going to adjust? I know I'm not going to read that. A video on like the cheat codes for me. We do this thing in our department where we send a document of like advice to the incoming years or whatever. And we like add to it. And one of my things has always been like, as soon as you get the syllabus, study it like it is itself an essay, because then you understand critically, like, what are the objectives of the class? How is this person framing it? What kind of information do they want from me? The number of times that other students will ask me like, I don't understand why he said that because and I'll be like, child, it's in the syllabus. I told you that. But, it takes time to like understand what they're doing in the syllabus, but they kind of just like cram everything that they mean to do. But the professors often don't communicate all of what they mean to do. So if you read this kind of reading in between the lines of the syllabus, but beyond grad school reading struggles.
Yeah, let's get into this, the book.
So we were on chapter 3, which is Disturbing Nurses and the Kindness of Sharks. And up to this point, some of the key things that Morrison is talking about are this idea of the Africanist presence, which he sometimes uses interchangeably with the Black presence, which is not to say that I think that she's making Black and African interchangeable, but to say that the way that it's deployed, how it's used within a white literary imagination, often places Africanist or Black inflections depending on the purpose. For instance, like something I'm interested in is like the way that the idea of terror in Haiti is used alongside kind of like zombie films in the early 20th century. Mm-hmm. So that one even though it's Haiti, it deploys a kind of Africanist presence of this like very voodoo and all that stuff. And in a lot of the instances, like in the Edgar Allan Poe, there's no kind of actually they're like an indigenous population in that story. The Nantucket Pam story is a very boring story. Um, but it's not necessarily black or African, but it's a very vacuous, dark presence, and so there's
Well,
a
that's
lot
a
of.
big word, vacuous.
You know what? I feel like I've used it a lot recently because I think it. First of all, this year is vacuous. I don't even think I used
Yeah.
it right there. Um, so I think that there's a lot of flexibility, I would say, even in this very like particular trope that she's describing. Um, and then in this part, she brings it back to what race means. So she says that race isn't biological, but is more so metaphorical. So, or yeah, um, which is interesting. Um, do you hear a lot that race is biological?
Because like, okay, so that's like the first statement, that's the first sentence in the chapter, right?
Yeah.
And it did kind of, race has become metaphorical, a way of referring to distinguishing forces, events, classes, and expressions of social decay, right? And then, well, in what context do we even discuss race as biological, really, at this point? I,
At this point, yeah.
I was thinking, it just made me think of, Hortense Spiller's American Grammar. I'm like, isn't Morrison kind of making the same point that the language of race is not really, and part of it is that if it was actually used as an identity marker, we would have a much more fleshed out landscape of racial language to use to be able to identify our ethnic and racial makeup, but we don't. And every time I think to do like a YouTube video talking about like, like bring it to pop culture, like, is a Cardi B black? Like, who gets to say I'm black? My conclusion always is that we don't actually have enough language to aptly and productively have these conversations, because that is not the utility of race in America. It is not meant to be. The fact that we've been able to do it is a testament to, the ingenuity of our ancestors, but that's never been the principle. That's never been the point. And as Morrison says, it's meant to be did you say metaphorical, and used to, what was it that she said? It's assumed a metaphorical life so completely embedded in daily discourse that it perhaps more necessary and more on display than ever before. But she was making the point. This is where I highlighted it at. Hold on. Oh, Africanism is inseparable from the definition of Americanness.
Yeah. And it's interesting because she like kind of pivots or returns to a couple of historical nodes, one of the biggest being Enlightenment. And Sylvia Wynter also does this, kind of looking at Enlightenment as this period of, if I can reduce it to one thing, basically like knowledge production or information. And so something I'm still a little convoluted on origins of race because it's not really that helpful. There's several different texts on it that I've read recently. You can read Richard Dyer. You could read, I don't know. Maybe we'll do a list about that later on. It's actually pretty boring. The people who are doing a lot of the research on the origins of race are stuffy white men who, I mean, it's
The great
useful.
men, yeah. The great
Yeah.
white men, yeah.
But the so race as biological. I don't know. I wonder sometimes like to what extent we still assume race is biological in some ways. Like for instance, like when someone says, I mean, the people who are saying this probably are usually typically foolish adjacent, who are saying things like, you know, the only thing that makes us different is our skin. right? Or, things of that nature. So to what extent is the kind of the subtext, the underlying idea there, that there is only a kind of intrinsic marker that differentiates us and nothing else, you know? And so I don't know. My one of my professors, he argues, honestly, it's been so long, it's summer, I don't really remember. But I think that it's really surprising to me as I've got further and further in my program, the way that this discussion still happens. When I was an undergrad, I assumed that like the kind of contentions of race were at some point settled, maybe during the 80s. And so there was some level of consensus in how we determined race, even at least academically. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is just something we discuss in Intro to Black Sociology and we'll be done with it. And it seems like it's a constantly ongoing thing. There's an essay that's pretty popular called Race as Meta Language.
Yeah.
I can't remember who was it. Evelyn
Oh, don't tell me Higginbotham.
Oh no. I don't remember. It's very popular essay. It caused a huge discussion.
What's the title of it?
In my class.
I'm at my computer actually.
Race as meta language.
As meta
language.
Oh, that's one word. The meta language of race. Then and now, it is Higginbotham.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I was gonna do a research paper on them, but maybe not.
I mean, maybe. I mean, it's a pretty contentious article. It'll give you a lot to write about. But basically, like,
they argue that in reflecting on the discipline of history and the ideas and events that inspired her science article, it is useful to look back and forward from 1992, thereby covering what amounts of 3 generations of scholarship. Is this actually a summary?
Maybe. It was a long time ago. Not really. It was a year and a half ago, but that feels like a long time ago.
Oh no, this was like 4 years ago. It was a while ago. Spring.
Oh no. When I read it. Yeah. So.
No, because I was thinking, I'm reading this article called "Visions of Freedom" by Elise Brown, a historian. I'm probably butchering their name, in the book is in the other room. And they were making they're talking about the Reconstruction period and Black women and how we can give another look over of Reconstruction and what it was the actual work of Black women. And was our struggle really towards democracy? Like, was that our concern? And so she starts off the article talking about how Black people perceive our fictive kinship, essentially, right? Like how we have fictive kinship in the sense of community, and how we understood that during this period of enlightenment where white people were saying it's individuals and individualism was an aggressive form of individualism was really being pushed, that Black people were understanding that freedom would not come through their autonomy, freedom had to come through the collective. And Morrison in her article, so in the Brown article, but then she's like, white people then said, well, that's a negative trait, that Black people consistently think of community and aren't individuals and don't think to get ahead of their brothers and sisters, but want to give free handouts to all the homies. And then they turn it into a negative because Black people were not paying into keeping the same system that buoyed free labor, essentially capitalism. And so then Morrison in here is talking about how the Africanist doesn't allow for the individualism that is typically expressed through whiteness. Well, did I misspeak it here? It's only on the second page of the article. It's a hyphenated sentence, but individualism is foregrounded and believed in when its background is stereotypified and forced dependency. Freedom to move, to earn, to learn, to be allied with powerful center to narrate the world can be relished more deeply in a cheek by jowl existence with the bound and unfree.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Maybe.
So she's making the point that there's a lot to I'm sorry. But the previous sentence, there's a lot of juice to be extracted from plummy reminiscence of individualism and freedom if the tree upon which such fruit hangs and is a black population forced to serve as freedom's polar opposite, because we have a sense of community that is embedded into us not wanting to be enslaved. Yeah, you can't beat an institution as an individual, and so you have no
Right.
choice but to be a collective.
Mm-hmm.
I just veered off topic. My bad.
No. I mean, conversation, a series of tangents. My whole life is tangents.
No, what I was thinking of that because you had referenced the Higginbotham article about the meta language of
Yes,
race.
my
And
tangent.
yes, there's a lot of, I mean, but the point, I think that's what's good about this Morrison article. And that's what's good about like what her work and how she makes sense is that we got to part 3 and I'm like, oh, there are all these reference points from all these other things that we have read that tie into what Morrison's saying. And these are things we read in the book club, whether it's Alice Walker, whether it's Ben Horton's Spillers, whether it's stuff that I'm reading in my history classes, whether it's stuff you've read in your graduate classes. I mean, I think her work, and she's talking specifically about the literary world, but this also kind of just parses out into language as a whole, and the way that we, as Spillers points out, how we as a Black community have embedded white supremacy into our language.
Yeah. And I think that in and of itself, that it's about our imagination. It's about, literary history and how it's embedded in history. I think that's all in the discussion of whiteness and race is also in itself very refreshing, because I mean, like we said, like the premier location for looking at race in a very substantial way, as like the concept of race, is usually in social science, even as it's departed from, race is biologically determined. So I think even though it's maybe not the most readable thing, it's readable for Morrison. That I think that there's so much, even when I struggle to necessarily cite things in here, because again, it's so condensed and she's making a lot of grand claims that are important, but it's not very easy text to cite a lot of times in scholarship. But it's also just affirming. Like if I want to go down a path to think about how can I write outside of, the typical canon, that there is someone who's critically aware of how Blackness is used or taken up in those texts. Like if I'm in my, English class and everyone's, well, let's read this through Derrida, let's read this through Foucault, Lecompte, like all of those things, I can be like, well, Sister Morrison here, like not literally, but it's just it's just once you get through it, it's kind of an affirming read.
Yeah. Once I got to part 3, I'm like, oh, okay. But let's work through the linguistic strategies employed in fiction to engage the serious consequences of Blacks, because I think that feeds into the last few questions here in the syllabus. And thank you. This was a great syllabus. We're actually working so that people can order the syllabus print on demand, since so many people have been asking about printing and they're now full color, so it's a little bit harder to print at home. We're going to offer a print version of the syllabi, just working through the mechanics of that now, while also going to school and being a YouTuber and adulting.
How's that candle burning?
It really does help. Have you not noticed my mood changed? Did you not see it? I'm so serious.
I'm so sorry. I didn't notice. No, I said I didn't notice the candle. Stop. As soon as you lifted it up, I was like, oh, an orange glow.
Yeah, focus. It's been glowing.
I thought maybe you were still struggling with the lighter.
No, he's glowing. prop.
Like I thought you did
Okay.
like a YouTube prop change, like you lit it
Oh
and then just
no,
like did it
no.
away.
These I thought like I be thinking these lighters are so ableist because you really do need two hands to light it.
Yeah,
Like I could never get it with one. It's a struggle. I have
fair.
so many candles in the house because I have the book club candles, and then I checked my PO box the other day, and there were Forever Mood candles in there.
Nice, very nice.
Okay, so the last few questions, which ask about in what ways is the fabricated design of an Africanist present useful to the white imagination, and in the syllabus you're actually asking us to expand beyond literature. And then the previous question is what particular insights does American literature provide that other genres of study cannot? So, like history, political theory. Yeah. And then what type of narrative or linguistic strategies do these authors employ to create the fictional Africanism? And I thought what was interesting, see, this is where, like, unlike in her fiction, she does give a lot more context in particular in breaking down like these linguistic strategies and really honing the point. So economy of stereotype, that it allows the writer a quick and easy image without the responsibility of specificity, accuracy, or even narratively useful descriptions. So the economy of stereotype, and I imagine there's so many ways that we can parse that outside of literature. Like how do stereotypes move a story along? And if we ever like read or watched something and it was like this dark, I can't speak because my mind is slicing what I'm trying. Enigmatic. It's not the what's the word? You know, when you're dark and
I thought that's I thought that's how you were describing Dark Mysterious. Was like, I'm with you, I'm with you. I thought you were like describing Black Mirror, and I was like, oh,
I that's way too complicated for me to get into now, but enigmatic. Isn't that a word?
enigmatic,
I-
like
it,
ENIGMATIC.
yeah. Enigma.
Yeah.
Okay, so like but okay, whatever, a dark, mysterious, blurry character who just
Yes.
fits stereotypes. And
Yes.
when she goes into talk specifically about Hemingway, um, who employs several other themes, there's also the stereotypes of like the N word hard R, the nigger man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they like the character never gets defined. So when we read The Other Black Girl, and in that the main character works at a publishing house and this white author is writing this book and he has like a poor crackhead pregnant by 5 different men and her name is tarisha Starisha or something real like, you know what I mean, like real. It was That was the economy of stereotypes. Okay, so number 2 is the metanomic displacement, and I actually wanted to look up the definition of metanomic.
But also, she also cites Poe, and I just wanted to mention with especially the linguistic kind of like wealth of stereotypes that kind of push along the narrative. Goldbug is really interesting if anyone wants to read it, because Goldbug, it's literally it's heavy in dialogue, but the dialogue most of the time is this stereotypical. It's the slave man who's uh, loyal to his master, owner, whatever. So they're asking him questions to inquire about, like, oh, what did you see? What did you find? And it's literally painful to read that. And Morrison shares that in the other essay, that it's literally painful for her to read these people kind of basically butcher the language that we've known, been grown into, sewn into, like, So I think that's something, even in film today, something with the way that people play with the affectations of Black people is something so insidious that really pushes along stories, it pushes along punchlines, it pushes along, and yeah, I think that's one of the big ones that she really, if not in this book, definitely in that essay, hits on. But
Yeah,
metonym.
yeah. So metonym, and I was like, okay, why I like No, it's not a word that I commonly see, but I felt like I've seen it before. And I feel like Spillers in part 1 of American Grammar makes the point about, like, you know, how suits becomes to mean business people in the same way that some cultural markers of Black identity has come to have negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, like, our way of life becomes metanomically attributed. But so metanomic displacement, and so this is promises much but delivers little and counts on the reader's complicity in dismissal. Color coding and other physical traits become metonyms that displace rather than signify the Africanist character. So again, dark,
And that's the whole
black,
character, those
blurry,
attributes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, even get into like more pop
Or
culture moments,
dangerous.
or like, well, crackhead you assume means Black person,
Yeah.
and even though that person never has to be identified.
Mm-hmm.
Metaphysical condensation, this allows the writer to transform social and historical differences into universal differences. It denies history. You're denying the political, you're denying discernment and understanding political context, and then flattening it. So again, I mean, Hortense Spillers, yes. So the Moynihan Report, again, I've only read one thing, and it was Hortense Spillers this year.
You see how it happens, right? Like people, you're like, why is everyone dropping Spillers? It's like, oh, because that bitch is always relevant. You know, respectfully,
No,
she's
but she
always
is
relevant.
like gave
She's
me spoke
always
it.
relevant.
Felt like I was reading hieroglyphics at some parts, but we worked through it. We read through it. We did that. I'm very happy because I get to be a smart bitch in class now.
Yes.
So a Facebook user is saying, so she's saying the economy of stereotypes is kind of like a scapegoat, a way to unload what you need onto them. I think all the literary techniques that we're reading here, that on page 67 and 68 of part 3, are all kind of like scapegoats. Like, they're lazy writing techniques that are coded into our language.
And become interchangeable with actual people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying, like you know, you can write about a crackhead and describe no other feature or quality to them, but it is assumed and known that they are Black, but the fullness of them being a Black person is completely encapsulated by the crackhead.
Yeah.
Which the 80s were a terrible time.
Number 4 is fetishization. So this is especially useful in evoking erotic fears or desires and establishing fixed and major difference where difference does not exist or is minimal. You know, the way this pops up in literature, so I'm taking a museum studies class that I feel like is a waste of my time. We're only 2 classes in. I'm over it. Black professor from Morehouse University. Okay, sure. Anywho, we read Museum Masters as our first book. Did not buy it, thankfully. Thank God. But it's essentially a bunch of biographies of individuals that Professor Edward Alexander thought were like the masters of how museums came to be. All white people. And so when you get to the Louvre, the Louvre,
The
I
Louvre,
don't
yeah.
speak no French. How's it say?
The Louvre.
The Louvre. Okay.
Yeah.
The Louvre. The Louvre. There's this white man named Denon. Okay, Denon is the way his name became after the French Revolution. And like the way Alexander writes about him is like, I just like, a Black person would never get away with this. He was just like, the man liked to draw pictures of like Greek sex scenes.
Yeah.
He liked the more litigious aspects of life.
White people were wildin'.
Or that he wanted to meet Louis XIV, so he just stood outside the road where Louis XIV crossed every day and stared him down until the king talked to him.
Why does Shonda Rhimes want to be transported romantically to these like whimsical white periods where people were wildin'? Don't insert Black people there. I don't need it. I don't need
but
them.
At 51, he went on a war tour with Napoleon to Northern Africa and pillaged. And he was so enamored with getting quality over quantity that he would wait back after a battle to like steal shit and put it in the Louvre. And I feel like that tied into fetishization some way, somehow.
Oh yeah, when you do, I imagine your project on Sarah Bartman in museum studies. Or I mean, there's so many examples. There's, is it Ariel's tears? The slave woman who's crying in the photograph, and it's like, it's early photography. Um, but yeah, there's so many examples of.
Fearing the Black Body by Sasha, is it Sabrina Strings? And she's talking about, like, she's exploring the history of art and how it is based on the fetishization of like the black body, but like a still disdain for the black person. And so
Yeah,
that kind of, she's tying it into like this now like current idea of body types.
yeah,
So how do we get this idea that we should have big tits and big butts, but like flat stomachs and still be very petite?
yeah,
Where do we get this idea that we should have full lips, but we should not have black noses?
yeah.
And it's connected to like this fetishization where certain aspects of us become sexual desires that can be owned, but that we are never seen as full. We never have full autonomy as people, as
Mm-hmm.
a human being. And so we become as us spillers would say, we are a utility.
Yeah. Also, I know you like history. Making Gullah. Have you read it or heard of it?
I've heard of it.
It's a really good book. I'd recommend it. But it's a different type of fascination, I'll say, rather than fetish of, or it could be object fetish, a cultural object fetish, is people being interested in, the reprisal of Gullah. Where did, like all of these things of like, tourism being a major part of Gullah, also in it being it's this very kind of cultural toxicity, like assuming Gullah to be this kind of antiquated object, similar parallels to any other way that people have consumed or assumed Black culture to be and operate. Um, but yeah, it's a good text. You reminded me, something you said reminded me of it.
All right, so number 5 is dehistoricizing. Wow, tongue tied. Dehistoricizing allegory. This produces foreclosure rather than disclosure. I thought that was an interesting sentence. It produces foreclose. Like I've never heard that used in like the literary sense. That some like I know what it means to foreclose a house, like
Oh,
shut that shit down quick.
the girls love that word in in the humanities.
Yeah,
Oh,
they
it
love
drives me
foreclosure.
crazy. They love foreclosure. Oh God,
This was my first
foreclose it.
entente with the word foreclosure used in the literary sense
Oof.
rather than disclosure.
The
Its difference
Afro-pessimists love that one.
its difference is made so vast that the civilizing process becomes indefinite. Taking place across an unspecified infinite amount of time, history as a process of becoming is excluded from the literary encounter. And then she goes on to give an example in O'Connor's, or like Cruiser quotes O'Connor's "The Artificial Nigger," and then she also references Poe, which we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
It is, you do think you read books like, and Black people just kind of exist. But I think
Yeah.
even Black authors are guilty of this. Like when I was reading this book, I just posted a review of Underground Railroad, the Amazon Prime series. I know nobody's gonna watch it. It's okay, but I'll continue to do it regardless. And I was talking about how I didn't like the Colson Whitehead book, and I feel like a lot of the reasons I didn't like it, Toni Morrison addresses in discussing whiteness in the literary imagination. Because I think it's a Black author that employs this sort of fetishization. Like, I was really bothered that you have the stereotypical rape scene, and that is used as a vehicle to describe the main character coming into her womanhood. Hmm? And then the raping was done by what this Black male author just identifies as brutes. Versus like in Beloved, we still get the discussion of the lack of autonomy over your body, right? So that you can be raped, you can be forced to procreate, and also the men face sexual violence as well. But it's not just like, but their characters, they're named, and even though I think Morrison kind of goes in Beloved and says that there really isn't a backstory to give for every character, because what does it mean for an enslaved person to be allowed to have a story?
And when you get to Song of Solomon, it's also, even though it carries further down into the 20th century, the complication of names just kind of carries through. So naming is like a very intimate, familial, like historical. It ties in all of those very things that are bound essentially to us. That becomes a very complicated and simple thing in essentially all of Toni Morrison's texts. And I really appreciate that, because then the name becomes in and of itself a metonym, or the name in and of itself of a person becomes uh, another layer. I mean, Spiller's hits on this, and also the prophets. I thought, with the one with the B, the one who was awful.
Balua, Auntie B.
Yes, yes. The kind of like parsing out even within herself of having two different names and holding those two to yield something very different, as a kind of probably a strategy of survival, similar to I'm bad with names, the one with the P. The girl who's in love with, yes, thank you. I know the first letter. That's what happens when you listen to the audiobook so much.
At least there were different voices for, or no, I'm reading Opal and Ned, which is our October read. There's different voices in the audiobook for that. It makes it much easier to get through. There's not just one person reading the whole book.
That's good. Any final thoughts on?
I think this is we have three, number 6. The patterns of explosive, disjointed, repetitive language. This indicates a loss of control in the text that is attributed to the objects of its attention rather than to the text's own dynamics. And I mean, she actually points this out again in Hemingway, and how like black characters will just appear. And who else? Is Tennessee Williams a white man?
Who?
Tennessee Williams.
Oh, that sounds very white.
No, I think he's a black man. I was about to say a play, or maybe no. It is. That's a white man. The picture just dark. Okay, Tennessee Williams, A Streetcar Named Desired. No, it'd be hard. The old school folk.
Tennessee, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, sis. I was trying to remember. Like, I always want to confuse Tennessee Williams with I have a gnat in here that's driving me crazy. Who wrote the play that Denzel Washington did?
Fences, August Wilson.
Okay, yes. Okay. For some reason, Tennessee Williams, August Wilson. I don't know why I always want to mix up. They're completely
calendar month, estate. I can see it.
Yeah. Okay.
He was light skinned in passing.
Yeah, but a streetcar named Desire has been criticized for the black characters in the play, and that they just exist, and they all exist as vehicles to further along the storyline of the white characters. And black characters, there's so much literature and media out there where black characters just appear. Lena Dunham's Girls, set in Brooklyn in the 2000s. And black characters are just background characters, and you never get someone who's fully fleshed out.
Not even Donald Glover, who was so proud.
It's all used as so I think there's so many points. You could definitely look at another Lena Waithe's work and consider this book. Them, where we have a whole cast of characters. We have the mother that was fetishized. We have the daughters who feed into stereotypes. We have violent moments that just happen to, like, I almost want to say the white characters have a bit more of a background story than the black characters did in the series.
Oh, yeah. Same with the Tyler Perry films. It seems the white characters have so much more interesting.
You know what? I have not watched the Tyler Perry movie. I'm keeping.
Oh, my parents have made me watch Nobody's Fool, and I screamed in protest the entire time.
Oh, yeah. My family has never said, let's watch a Tyler Perry anything.
It was payback for all them plays I used to watch when I was little. But
all right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We're getting into Sadia Hartman's Wayward Lives,
Woo!
beautiful experiments for the rest of the year. That'll be the exploration track read for the rest of the year. So September, October, November, December, 4 months. You can read a chapter. Even if you only read a chapter with us. And then this month we're doing The Secret Life of Church Ladies, which is a wonderful, fun read. So thank you for joining us. We probably might not see CJ again until 2022.
Yes, I'm taking a health break.
At this rate, but take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Keep cooking the good food. You can always mail me some. P.O. Box 18096, Charlotte, North Carolina.
My doctor just cleared
28218.
me.
What?
They just cleared me. I can eat dark greens again. So
Oh,
that's
you
one of
can eat dark greens?
so I'm able to introduce it, but she said you can have a cup of collard greens a week. I said, bitch.
Oh, she
And it's
tried
a cup
it.
raw, a cup raw.
Who
So
wants to
I
eat
have
raw dark greens? Why
no,
would
but
you?
but you have to account for it when it cooks down. So she was like, because it's a cup when it's raw, it's not a cup when it's cooked. And that goes for kale and
Damn.
so you'll see that I need a break.
I didn't know it was like that. But yeah, take the break that you need. Take care of yourself. And thank you for joining us for Playing in the Dark.
Thank you.
It's been great. See y'all on the other side. I'll probably see y'all in 2 weeks. I'll be back. Bye.
Bye.